All right, time for another episode with your buddy Kyle. Sorry this one took so long to make, but when you get stuck reading a book that's about 900 pages, sometimes it just takes forever to get a video out and have some thoughts and be feeling like you can discuss it with any intelligence whatsoever, such as I can. Anyway, this is my attempt to talk a little bit about two of the biggest horror books of 2025. I say horror really more with like quotations around it because I think they're more like horror genre blends. In one case, it's like horror historical fiction, and in the other, it's like horror slash crime slash fantasy. But we'll get to that. But I've also had a few different aims with this video. Number one, I wanted to talk about something new because I never talk about new things. I always talk about old stuff on this channel, and it's just kind of nice to be up with the trends every once in a while. Two, I wanted to sort of get over my horror hangover. I did so much horror content last month, as you can imagine I would. And this is my attempt to sort of wean off of my favorite genre and kind of move into what the rest of my year will look like. And then lastly, I needed something that kind of dovetailed with the November month for my reading calendar, which, I had other plans. Initially, I was thinking I was going to read something for Noirvember. I started working on that, but then that second book that's just so long took up so much of my time. So here we are. I will tell you how these relate to November and the Thanksgiving season as we talk about them. But first, let's talk about book number one, which is The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This was like the hot horror book of the first half of this year. So much so that it made Barack Obama's big list of summer reads. I'm whatever about the Obama list generally. I don't pay a lot of attention to them. But when a horror book shows up, I think, boy, maybe I should read that. It could be something worth talking about. And I honestly feel like it's pretty darn great. I've read a little bit of Jones at this point. I read The Only Good Indians in a previous video, which you guys can find in the back catalog. I thought that book was very good, 4-star read, but as the days have gone on, some of the greater details have kind of evaporated from me. It's probably just my memory more than anything, but it's a very good book with a really cool perspective. The Buffalo Hunter, I think, is even better. Matter of fact, I think it gets into that old hallowed capital M masterpiece territory. I was really blown away with this book. And just to give you the general gist of it, it's about a assistant professor or an associate professor, I can't remember which one it is, who is trying to get tenure and in academia, getting tenure and getting full professorship and all this stuff. It's a bit of a political thing. And so she's trying to get a book published in order to have a little more ammunition to work with. And as luck would have it, at a construction site, someone found a journal written by her great-great-great-grandfather, who was a Lutheran minister in a small village at the turn of the 20th century, 19th to the 20th century, 1900s. And so she decides, I'm going to transcribe this journal and I'm going to turn that into the subject of my book. I'm going to get published and everything's going to be hunky-dory. Then the book transitions from that as she begins to work on the transcription into entries in the journal. And we learn a little bit about Arthur, the church that he has established in this town or this village, and how there are murders that are sort of occurring on the outskirts of town. People they're finding bodies, and Arthur, as the man of faith there in the general area, has to go and inter those bodies and help them, I guess, seek their great reward or whatever. You need a man of faith to pray over a dead body, I guess. But he becomes obsessed with the family figures of these murdered men and how their deaths have come about. And in the midst of that interest and that pseudo investigation, a mysterious gentleman shows up during one of his services. And as soon as the flock leaves, this person sits down with Arthur and introduces himself. He is a Blackfeet tribesman named Goodstab, and Goodstab has a lot of interesting likes and dislikes. He is someone who is very long-lived. He happens to like the taste of blood. He happens to dislike sunlight. I think you know where this is going. And so then the story transitions again over into a third section and third POV, which is Goodstab relaying his tale and of how he became sort of cursed with vampirism and a lot of the tragedy that sits at his backstory. And it's fascinating to see those two books, those two POVs, which kind of take over the bulk of the middle part of the book, really most of the book at this point, as they switch between Arthur's journal, which is written in this sort of 1900s style, and then Blackfeet's story, which Arthur is transcribing, but is done in sort of a oral native tradition. And they're two very different styles of storytelling, two very different voices, all in the first person, of course. But it is a really fascinating exercise in Jones's prose flexibility. And then, of course, the framing narrative, which is written in the modern vernacular and is written in sort of this modern journal diary style from Etsy, the professor. There's a lot to like about this book. To be honest with you, it's one of the best vampire books I've read in a very long time. And for me, like, I don't read a lot of vampire fiction really anymore because I feel like there's not a lot of new things to say about one of the most well-worn folkloric types ever. But I really feel like this book is knocking on really hallowed ground in terms of like its stance in vampire fiction. As a book that in its structure, it is a lot like Dracula in that it's an epistolary style story, but its setup in terms of plot is a bit like, I would say, Interview with the Vampire, especially when you have the vampire relaying his story to someone who is capturing it in print. I think what sets the Buffalo Hunter apart is twofold. One, Jones uses Goodstab's story to provide a first-person account of the untold horrors of white settlers, European settlers coming to America, displacing the native communities and murdering, raping, pillaging, all of that. You know what happened. And really feeds a righteous anger that is then sort of it's filtered through vampire revenge fiction in a really satisfying way. And the way it intertwines with Arthur's own past is something that also kind of keeps you reading because you want to know, like, oh gosh, what is this interrelationship, and what are these dark secrets these characters have, and it's very fascinating. The other thing that I really like is that Jones adds a new wrinkle to the vampire mythos that I have not seen before, and that is very valuable to me. I get so tired of sort of the same kind of takes on vampires. Like, if you're gonna do something new, you know what I mean? If you're gonna tell a vampire story, tell a new vampire story. And Jones has this really neat kind of take on vampires that is centered on their own biology and how what they ingest impacts them physically. And the way that plays out in the story is very important, it turns out. And I really admired what he did here. And I think it makes it a story that really feels like it's going to last. Doing something new with vampires. Who knew? If there is one sort of tripping point that I do see online, especially on Reddit forums, when people talk about reading this book, they mention how Goodstab's story can sometimes be difficult to read. And I don't think it's hard to read in the sense that, like, the actual storytelling is difficult to read. It's not challenging language, but there's terminology that makes it hard for you to potentially ground yourself in the story when he's talking about, instead of wolves or deers, he's talking about big mouths and prairie runners, or whatever term you might want to use as an example. And it's helpful, I think, to have a glossary up front if you find something like that is difficult. But also Jones provides enough context clues throughout the story that I think if you were to just dive into the deep end, which I think you easily can do, that you will eventually come to be used to what a lot of these terms you're not familiar with, and this kind of new, referring to these settlers as Napaquans and stuff. Like, these are things that you will eventually like understand, and it will come like second nature to you, really. I'll say, though, it does remind me a little bit of Gene Wolfe's approach to unfamiliar terminology in Book of the New Sun, but in a different way, in a way that's obviously much more authentic to like real world experience and real world language. But it's additional value added, and I thought that absorption as a reader was really, really cool. Buffalo Hunter x Hunter is quite a book. I think you should absolutely read it. I think it is Jones's best book that I've read so far, and I think to many people it probably is his best book overall. I give it 5 stars because it's about our settling in America and all the horrible things that happened during that time. I think it makes for a perfect Thanksgiving read. Sorry to put on my big liberal hat, but I think that it's one of the best ways to think about Thanksgiving is about all the horrible things we did to be here. On another note, the second book I read is Joe Hill's King Sorrow. Now, I've read a little bit of Hill's work, probably about as much as I've read of Jones's. I had to read Horns back in, I would say 2014 or so, back when the movie was about to come out. It's not to humble brag, but I went to Comic-Con, I had to interview Hill. Very nice guy, sounds exactly like his dad. It's crazy, actually. But I read Horns, watched the movie. I didn't think much of either, to be honest with you. I thought the movie was horrible. One of the worst movies I've seen, actually. It's really bad. And I didn't think the book was much better, but it was a little better. But yeah, I kind of put me off of Hill for a while. But then these Black Phone movies came out, and I finally saw the first one. Kind of got interested in maybe jumping back on the Joe Hill train. And I picked up both 20th Century Ghost, which I've started kicking around and reading, and I'm enjoying. It's a good short story collection so far. And then I thought, all right, let's do it. This is like the big book of the fall. Let's read King Sorrow. It's 900 pages, book about a dragon. No idea what I'm getting into. And I really, really, really dug it. It's really good. And, it reminds me a lot of some of the best books of his dad's. Like, I haven't read Nosferatu and I haven't read The Fireman, so maybe he's always been working at this level of quality, but this was the one that made me think a lot about some of the best books of Stephen King's. And boy, that's really saying a lot, because you guys know what a big King fan I am. So what's this book about? Man, I mean, the scope on this thing is enormous. If you're talking about a 900-page book, it better be. But yeah, so you've got this group of friends who are all in college for the most part, and one of them is this guy named Arthur. Another character named Arthur, turns out. His name's Arthur. He works at a college library as a library assistant. Very smart guy. His mother is in prison for a big mistake she made years earlier. And when he is visiting her at the prison, he runs into this other family of shit kickers, basically, whose own matriarch is also in jail. They end up kind of crossing paths, and then because of something that happens at that jail, one of the sisters of this redneckish kind of family approaches Arthur and says, "Hey, we hear you work at this library, so we owe someone a lot of money, and we want you to steal books from this library so we can sell them and pay off our debts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." Arthur's like, "Oh, why should I do that?" And then they show him a picture of the mother being, with a knife towards her eye in the jail. And basically they're threatening his mother's life. And so now he has to begin to steal books, and he's in this horrible scheme in order to keep his mother safe while she's behind bars. Eventually his friends kind of get involved in this whole mishigosh, And one of the friends learns that one of the books that is there in that library, one of the most valuable books that this family wants him to steal, is actually the diary of a long deceased sorcerer. And they decide to use that book to basically summon a dragon. And the dragon cuts a deal with all of them, and that he'll slay one of their enemies once a year, but also, they have to continue to feed him yearly, et cetera, et cetera. It's a big Faustian bargain tale. And when I describe it like that, it probably doesn't sound as good as it actually is, but it's a really readable and fun book. What's, I think, most attractive about King Sorrow is its scope. And each book, it's made up of 5 books with little interlude chapters in between each book. But each book is basically another decade. So book 1 takes place in the, I guess, mid to late 80s. And then book 2 takes place in the 90s, book 3, the 2000s, 2010s, basically all the way up to modern day, more or less. And it details the struggle of each of these friends as they are still kind of undergoing the long tail effects of this pact they've made with this dragon, King Sorrow, who is constantly needing to be fed new murder victims, and they have to decide, like, who are we going to kill this time? It can be anybody. It doesn't have to be anybody they're friends with. It can just be someone that they've read about. It can be some mass murderer. It can be some terrorist. It could be anything, and they use that to their advantage sometimes. And I think that leads to some really interesting storytelling possibilities. But also what happens is that with each of these books, they're a bit like novellas that are kind of grafted together with one sort of overarching narrative framework. So again, we have sort of the library story, then like novella 2 is a sort of a plain story involving not Arthur, but a couple of these friends that are married and spending, or locked in a plane together as this King Sorrow stuff kind of comes to a head at a certain point. Then novella 3 sees another pair of these friends who are locked up and locked away, being questioned by authorities. I mean, like, this is the kind of thing that happens. Like, you've got these different sort of situational environments that are the center point of each novella that make up the entire book. And it's kind of fun to see, like, oh, what setup's going to be next, and where's Hill going to take us? Also, in between each one, there's also a character named Gwen, who's the youngest friend of all of them. And I guess kind of becomes the lead character of the book after a while, which is kind of funny. You sense that Hill was very into Arthur at the beginning, but he becomes less interested in this character. He's kind of whatever. He's not that interesting a character, but he's much more interested in this character, Gwen, who sort of, by virtue of being more fleshed out and having more of the sort of story thrust upon her, becomes the lead character. And she has these interlude chapters that act as bridging material between each of the novellas and kind of help us fill in the gaps between years. And I like a lot of what Hill does too in referencing real world disasters and great tragedies. You have things like the Oklahoma City bombing, which kind of comes into play in the story. Certainly 9/11 gets referenced a lot. The only big thing that we kind of never see is reference to COVID, which probably wouldn't really fit very well. And given that his dad wrote the great pandemic book, there's no need to talk about it. But I thought this was a really, really fun book to read. And you really go for a ride, man. I mean, you're spending 900 pages with these characters. You better be enjoying it. And it never felt particularly arduous to me. I've read a lot of long books in my life, and sometimes I can't wait to read the next page, and sometimes I feel like I'm slogging through them because they didn't need to be that long. But with King Sorrow, it's breezy enough, and for the most part remains a very strong point of interest and sort of an exciting adventure that I never really felt like, well, this is a lot of work to read, you know. Even though it took me a while to read it, I didn't really feel like I needed to like skip anything or felt like, God, I wish this had been deleted. I have to be honest, there are some parts of the Gwen chapters which maybe feel a little long, and maybe you could have shaved something here or there, but I don't know. I mean, the book is the book, and I largely felt like it was time well spent with a really great storyteller. And I feel like now, even though I guess it took him like a decade to write this book, and I get why, Hill is kind of coming into the peak of his powers as a writer. And I'm just really glad I got a chance to experience it in real time, which I never really got to do with any of his dad's major books, even though I had the opportunity. Oh well. King Sorrow, I give it 4 stars, which when I first heard about the book, I had like negative interest in it, but here I am giving it a great review because it's actually a really fun, enjoyable book. And if you're interested in a doorstop horror novel, which I don't feel like we get a lot of those anymore, we tend to get mostly like these big thick books in like the fantasy genre, but in horror specifically, it's pretty rare. And, you know, if you want to spend a lot of time with a group of characters who will grow with you, and you'll really see them go through some stuff and feel very lived in, this is a book you'll really dig. If you're wondering what this has to do with November and Thanksgiving, I think the familial connections between found families and the family you choose is very obvious. Anyway, those are my reviews of the 2 biggest horror books of 2025. There's probably some others that someone would say, oh no, this book's bigger, you should read this instead. But this is what I read, okay guys? And I don't know. People were talking about them a lot. So those are the ones I read. Anyway, I hope you dig it. I hope you read them. Let me know what you think if you have read them. If not, get on it because I think they are super worth your time. In the meantime, like, comment, and subscribe because that's also worth your time. You guys keep on reading. We'll see you next time as we move into the holiday season. Everybody, hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving. See you soon. Bye-bye.
This video is sponsored by me. I have a book out. Do you like short horror stories in the vein of Stephen King? Small town interconnected intrigue a la Ray Bradbury? The narrative weirdness of Gene Wolfe? Then this may be the book for you. Pick up Taking Root by Kyle Pinion today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and any online book retailer.